and growth and partnerships for Mars X. So if you ever want to talk about possible collaborations, hit me up. Super open to talk about it. And today with me is Ed Kang, and he's the lead startup advisor for startups.com, co-founder of Qortex Institute and Global Synergy University. And we go way back when we first discussed partnership between MarsX and startups.com. And he was super thrilled and kind enough to show his enthusiasm about the platform. And ever since, we've been talking and exploring the synergies between the two platforms. So thank you for that, Ed. And it's lovely to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's, you have a lot on your plate, and it would be really, really interesting to know what you're working on right now. What's your biggest commitment?
Well, my commitments spread out across a portfolio. One of them, obviously, is to be the lead advisor for startups.com. That's sort of an excuse to work on an investment thesis I have for multiple funding sources. So I'm general partner for a late stage Accelerator Consultancy out of Beijing, China, and then also general partner for a new alternative funding accelerator here locally, and startups of all stages. So the startups.com position and then connecting with Mars and gives me an excuse to rub elbows and network with as many founders as possible to continually explore an investment thesis, because part of what I have to do is look into the future and make some predictions and help people, the ecosystem in general, all different parts, and founders, investors, the different parts that will contribute to what I hope is a thriving startup generation of founders in the future.
Oh, that's amazing. And yeah, it's super interesting that you are trying to stay on top of everything that's going on as a startup ecosystem. Is that why you also have your own podcast?
Yes, I have my own podcast. One, it's always about lifelong learning, so continuous learning myself. It's just easier if you invite a founder and say, hey, can I just spend an hour talking with you? You're going to get a certain response. But if you say, hey, I want to record a podcast with you and come have you share it, they're going to be a lot more open. So it gives me a chance to chat with founders and learn from them. I'm learning just as much as I hope other people are learning. And then also it's about replicating the reach of the information and putting quality content out there, sort of the right signal through all the noise. So founders, other people that maybe I can't have one-on-one conversations with because my time is very limited, they can watch and they can learn. And it's really community-based content is, all about mentoring. We're learning from each other. And that's the reason I want to put out there. It's all functional. I'd love to eventually become the Joe Rogan of startup podcasts. But for me, it's all about helping get the right information out there so everybody can learn.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed quite a few of your podcasts, and thank you for giving us a chance to be on one. I'd interviewed John, our CEO, and you can all watch it on his channel. But yeah, I love that you mentioned learning from a community, this is another time that I hear that don't just come with an ask, right? Hey, I want to learn from you, but come with an offer, right? You teach me something and I'm going to give you exposure or whatever it is you're looking for in the podcast. So that's amazing. So what are Qortex Institute and the Global Synergy University? What are those?
So I'll start, my long-term passion is teaching. I just explain to people I'll never retire if I had the fortunate opportunity to do whatever I wanted to. I'd go teach and I'd provide education. And so Global Synergy University is a startup. It's an ed tech venture funded out of China. And I lived in China since 2018 for 2 years. And then we launched that platform, and it's something that I'm pursuing there. So it's for higher education in organization development and leadership. So master's degrees and doctoral degrees. And we're really trying to change the way professionals learn. And we have a unique thesis and different assumptions that we're testing out. During the time that I was in China, I wrote a book. Actually, here it is right here. I wrote a book called The Qortex Circuit, and it was all about my journey in training my brain and understanding joy, the emotion of joy, because part of my portfolio or my past, I'm an executive coach certified in the brain science of high performers, so how emotions affect the brain. So I began researching about joy, and I wrote this book, and I began teaching that executives, and it kind of became its own thing. So when I came here, I got I had to leave China and haven't been able to get back since. Well, then I decided, okay, well, let's put this in another platform. And so Qortex has become almost like my own personal passion startup, but it involves everything around joy and what we call joy effects. And that's where I'm building my investment thesis, which eventually will be submitted into Global Synergy University for my doctoral thesis, so a dissertation. So eventually I want to become Dr. Ed Kang, but I want to build it on joy effects and how that affects startups and founders and entrepreneurialism and the economy and all that good stuff.
Oh wow, that's super exciting.
Yeah.
I actually got my bachelor degree in China, and
Wow.
yeah, and it's really exciting that you're talking about the change and how how people learn, how especially how adults learn, like professionals, because to be completely honest, nothing about that education was
Yeah.
non-traditional.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, especially how is it going? I mean, how is it going promoting this concept in China?
It's very unique. It is on one hand, it's going amazing. I love our Chinese professional learners. I love working with them. Obviously, we're not dealing with bachelor's degrees. We're dealing with professional learners who are very accomplished in their career. But I love the challenge of combining East versus West. And therefore, we've taken a stance of not saying, okay, here's Western education, we're going to import it into China. We're going to export it from the West and import it into China, or vice versa. We're trying to create a new global, and the CEO and the founder who we built the IP around, and just some amazing professors. The changes that I'm seeing in terms of people's thoughts and how we're participating together, working together as a global community. I'm inspired, also highly privileged and honored to be a part of a venture like that.
That's awesome. No, I'm super excited to learn more. I will definitely do some research after our podcast. But yeah, as a lead advisor for the startups.com, what is your main commitment there, and what are the challenges of the startups that are coming to you?
My main commitment, while interestingly enough, I don't see it as being an advisor, because quite simply, I don't scale. It's really difficult. And our stance, and how I describe it, and this is my view of startups.com, is to be an online accelerator. We're community based, so we're founders accelerating other founders. And that in itself poses some really unique challenges because we don't have the same structure. I like to say we want to serve the 99% of founders that don't get into a great network like Y Combinator or another accelerator like Techstars, which I highly recommend. I've had my experiences with each. So with that comes its own unique challenges of how do you then help and do it at a certain scale and provide access and opportunity, equal access and opportunity for everybody. Those are the main things. So I would say one of the biggest challenges is the variance of founders that come in. Like we're not focused on one niche. We can't say we're going to specifically bring in a founder in one type of vertical or a certain stage. And they come from all walks of life. And I'm the type of person that, it's kind of cliche to say democratize the opportunity, but I want everybody, especially the underrepresented, underserved, and underestimated founder, to have an opportunity to learn at least what a startup is and how that might be different from business. So we get all different types of people with varying expectations, thinking startups are one thing and, coming in. So educating people and doing it at scale, that's probably the biggest challenge right now.
All right. And what are the challenges of the startup founders that are coming to you for some advisory sessions?
Well, this is where I get a little cheeky because the problem that they think they have is not the problem that they have most of the time. And that's the biggest challenge that they bring. So there's a challenge that they believe, so they perceive, but then the reality is quite different. For example, I would say 80% of the startups that come through think they have a problem with funding, but they don't. And their problem has to do with much more fundamental, principle-based aspects, foundational things about their startups, such as idea validation. They don't have idea validation. So they come in thinking they need funding and they focus on funding when the reality is they're not going to get funded ever until they deal with some fundamental issues such as idea validation. So the challenge, they tell me, it's always a balancing act. They'll tell me, Ed, I need funding. And I'll say, well, you kind of don't, but let's talk about it and let's give you a different perspective, and therefore trying to educate people, because there's a lot of expectations that come with being a founder that you hear in media, and it's very popular. Like the opportunity and the number of founders has exponentially increased, which is due to platforms like Mars, which I think are a very important part of the ecosystem to be able to provide very easy entry and access to build something technical. But with that, the funding has only linearly increased. And therefore, it's, especially right now in today's market condition, therefore, what you think as a founder, what you think your problem is, quite often is not your problem.
Right. It's great that you mentioned, idea validation, because and I agree with you on a larger scale, but I've been talking to a few and quite successful founders lately on the podcast as well. And when I asked, hey, how did you validate the idea? And they were like, well, we didn't, we never really looked into our competition. We just believed in the product, and we kind of just focused on building the best version of it. And I thought, okay, but that, that disagrees with absolutely everything, accelerators or advisors or whomever else tells you. So where is this fine line between just talking to your customers and making sure you get to the last piece of advice, to the last piece of information they're able to give to you, and just focusing on building, making sure that you put the best version of the product on the table before you give it to anybody?
I appreciate you bringing this up. It's it's vexing and infuriating at the same time. It's what makes startups magical. It's fine. It's hitting lightning in a bottle, like catching lightning in a bottle. And this is the issue. Podcasts like this, and when we bring on guests that we want to talk to, they have these amazing stories, but they fall into such a small percentage of founders, and therefore it can be quite misleading. I tell founders all the time that, I'm a 7-time funded founder. I think I can't even remember how many. 7-time funded founder, and I've had 2 exits, and everybody wants to talk about the exits. But what makes me, I believe, an effective advisor is I explain that means I failed 5 times miserably. In fact, my failures are 1 order of magnitude greater than my successes. And therefore people look at these, one-offs. And they look at the professional sports player that got recruited out of college, and what happened, or maybe they skipped college and came out of high school, and they don't look at the process. So if you take a process-oriented approach, you can celebrate the results all the time, but if we don't, as an industry, take a process-oriented approach, then we're going to leave way more bodies in bags. We're going to have a higher body count, if you will. Casualties will be much higher. It's not going to be worth it. In fact, I think it's a lot more damaging to the startup ecosystem to romanticize those stories of, the Instagram story. Just one day, just sit down and let me just create a filter for some photos, or, different things like that. While that's a great story to listen to, and I appreciate founders that can do that. But if we don't take a process, and that's the fine line. In fact, it's not even really a fine line for me. It's a major line. It is a line in the sand that if founders don't go through validation, they put themselves at such a high risk. And I don't believe any startup success is worth it to have a large portion of founders or entrepreneurially minded people fail miserably because they haven't undertaken the idea validation process.
Right. No, and again, like I said, I agree with you on a larger scale. And I think, as also as a non-tech person, and maybe in the future a non-tech founder, who knows, if I'm going to take a dive into this horrible
I hope you do.
adventure. But I think it's just, again, I have to emphasize on that. For a non-tech founder, it's easier maybe to start with the idea validation, because I also have quite a few emails that say, hey, can you guys fund us? Can you guys build something for us? Because later on we will go and validate our idea, and then come back with the investment. And I already have a template of all the different tools that they can use before they build something to validate their idea. And I just shoot the email to the founders. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. So how was your journey of validation as a 7-time founder?
Yes. I think that through every startup that I did, there's always the beginning stages where you're so excited, and it starts with an idea and it begins with this vision. And as you get older, I would say my first very seriously funded, startup happened, I dropped out of college, very cliche, got funding, dropped out of college type thing. And there was no idea validation. And unfortunately, and I share this story very openly, that first startup got acquired. I personally think that was one of the worst things that could have happened to me. A great thing. I'm not ungrateful whatsoever, but it was the worst thing because I just had this idea that, I'm going to touch something and turn it to gold. So then as I get older and I have more cost of opportunity, I do more idea validation because I'm married, I have children, I have a mortgage, different things like that. I'm not freewheeling, living for $300, renting a room, type thing, working out of a garage. So I do more idea validation and more customer discovery and distribution. The older I get and the wiser I get, the more I've been doing it. And the results have been a far higher rate of success and sustainability. So even though, no, I haven't built a unicorn, I definitely tried back in the day. Our startups have turned just into very positive cash flow generating stable businesses. And I think that's just as good. I think to myself, well, what's the difference between a unicorn that makes $100 million a year and is valued at $1 billion versus a network of 100 founders making $1 million a year, and they work together? I personally think the value of that network is $1 billion. That's a unicorn network, right there. So therefore my stance has changed. And, I know I'm not always popular in terms of my opinions, as far as the professional startup world, but that's the way I think about it. My, discipline has dramatically increased over the years. And I hope that founders learn the same thing. While at the same time, I don't want founders in the early stages, if they're young, I'll ask them, you know, do you have a relationship? Do you have kids? Are you married? What do you pay for rent? And all these things. They say, oh, I've got no expenses, this and that. I say, go for it. Go crazy. YOLO your funds, YOLO that money away. You got your life completely ahead of you, learn it. Whereas what scares me is the professional that's in their 40s or 50s and they say, I'm going to take, $50,000, $100,000 out of my retirement and send it to a dev shop to build an app, that they tell me they can build for my idea. That really scares me. So then I will pump the brakes and tell them, stop, please. I don't know how else to get you off this track, but I'll challenge them. So I'll do that more with older founders. I'll advocate for more idea validation, customer discovery, different, channel testing, everything like that. The older that they get, the more cost of opportunity they have.
That's interesting. So what was the that first startup that got acquired? What was it?
First startup, it was we did a digital, we were one of the first companies to do animation online. So we started off as a 3D animation house. We were inspired by Pixar, but then we got into how does this translate to online? So we were experimenting with the first version of animated GIFs or GIFs, however you want to talk about it, however you want to pronounce it. And then we got into way back in the Flash and animated greeting cards. And so during the first .com explosion, we became a content producer for all these startups and began experimenting with that, how to email, cards together or like animated greeting cards and attach them to songs and then click on the song and be able to, purchase a song, all those things. So that was acquired by a larger entertainment label, a record label that wanted to get into transmedia, multimedia. Media 2.0 is what they were calling it back in the day.
Oh, I think I remember something like that, a website that was doing that. Maybe it was yours.
We probably contributed to it somehow.
Maybe. But what was the most challenging startup after that?
Most challenging startup after that? Well, I would say there's two dimensions I can answer this question. The startup that had the most funding was the most challenging because of the pressure. And, as soon as, I tell my co-founder, new levels, new devils. Like you get to a new level, you got all the devils in all the details, and then you just have really not unethical people, come and they try and take advantage. Everybody always flocks to you when you've got funding and you're making revenue. So that was one dimension that was challenging, but rightfully so. Another challenge, and the worst kind are the ones that you do to yourself. One venture, I picked the wrong co-founder and, got involved. I started off as an angel investor. They asked me to become the CEO, and it was the worst. The breakup of that startup was traumatizing emotionally. I can get over losing a pile of money, but the emotional cost of that startup and the challenges that I had from the co-founder all the way to relationships to the board, that almost took me out and almost made me say, I'm retired. Like I just need to get out of the game.
And after that, did you have co-founders?
No, not new co-founders. I have a network of partners, but yes, I completely changed my approach to co-founders, and I have not had a new co-founder since. I've only just partnered with individuals I've had long-standing experience with. In fact, one of my co-founders now was my first angel investor. So we've been partners for over 25 years, but officially, going in together on a venture, it's a different configuration than your typical, two co-founders get together and let's just start hacking away at a solution. And it's only because that's the stage I'm at as far as my own founder journey.
Okay, but what's your advice for the founders, especially for the first-time founders, going solo or having a co-founder?
My advice is it depends on what you're trying to build. There are startups that you can do solo, and there are startups you definitely need a co-founder, and the scale and what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do a lifestyle startup, don't get a co-founder. You don't need a co-founder. Have as much control as possible. If you are trying to build something, massive that's going to require funding and getting out there and talking to investors and what have you, my advice is it's not like a marriage. Marriages, imply something completely different, an inappropriate relational dynamic between co-founders, that people say it's going to be like a marriage. And divorces are really hard. Like divorces kill you. And but at the same time, you shouldn't just go to a hackathon and meet someone and say, hey, I'm going to give you 50% of my company. That's really dumb as well. So if you don't need to do that, it should be like a sports team. I think of it such as, when a coach at a professional level or the team, they bring on a star player, the coach and the general manager and the team fly over and they spend time with the athlete in their home and getting to know them. And here's our philosophy and different things like that. So there's a courting period, but then when, the relationship gets consummated, there's an expectation to perform or you're cut from the team. And that is how I like to look at co-founder relationships.
So what do you think about, all the communities where it's possible to go and find a co-founder? Do you believe that, it can be successful?
No, I don't. I don't for the long term, just in my experience. And obviously I've got a certain amount of PTSD even every time that you bring that up. But I believe those communities are really great to meet co-founders. But every founder needs to have a high degree of self-awareness to vet that relationship. And therefore, I recommend do a project together. Like, just don't, and so like I'll compare it with, and I said don't compare it to marriage, but I took a very business approach to getting married in the sense that I told my now wife when we were dating, our first date, I said, let's go out on one date, let's enjoy each other's company, and let's not have expectations. And if we want to have another date at the end, let's talk about it, right? But in the meantime, let's just go have fun versus, oh my gosh, like, what's this going to imply? And, just having, wildly inappropriate conversations, just enjoy the relationship for the relationship's sake. And it's the same thing that I tell co-founders is do a project together. Like even again, back to professional sports, they have workouts. They have these private sessions where, let's get some reps in together. And so meeting a co-founder in these networks is great. But at the same time, and this might not, might rub some founders the wrong way, but if you have to go into one of these networks to meet a co-founder completely cold, I'm going to question a few things on what's the reason you can't network yourself? What's the reason you need facilitated network? Because I find, in my experience, the best co-founders that I've worked with and that I've seen in teams have organically, naturally developed relationships. They've been tracking on each other. They've always had beers together, coffees, dreamt together and said, all right, it's time, let's do this, versus, I met someone at a hackathon or I met someone at a networking event and they said, I'll be your co-founder. You won't believe some of the more common conversations I have are, how do I break up with this co-founder? I gave him 50% of the company. I gave him this big title. How do I unwind this? And then I have to be coaching on a completely different level. I'm a different type of advisor at that time.
Okay, no, I completely agree with you, and oh, sorry for the noise. But yeah, I also had this experience where I had to break up with a co-founder, but I guess we took the same approach to it as you took with your now wife. We never really, set up any expectation to what's going on. We never said, we're co-founders, this is 50-50, this is yours and this is mine. And the exit was very clean and mutually respectful.
Yeah, so, that's great. To break up with dignity, any relationship, if you can do it with dignity because you've hope for the best but plan for the worst, that to me is the ideal way to do it, for sure. It's great to hear a story like that.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad to share it. But yeah, I want to go back a little bit to when you were talking about getting funded, and also kind of mix it up a little bit with the current topic. So you said it's best to find your co-founder in your network. What about finding investors? Is it still the same situation where it is better to go with somebody? And I think you say it in one of your videos, is that your investor is about six people or something like that away from you, right? So what do you think? Do you believe in, again, cold calling, cold emailing, stalking people on LinkedIn to get funding, or is it still networking?
Yes. So it's just exactly the same way. It's astute of you to compare it with, how I describe finding co-founders, because I also question the same thing. If someone needs to cold call investors and they refuse to go and network, then I'm going to question their ability as a future founder. Because what a lot of founders don't understand is they think it's all just about the idea and what they've built and their MVP, but a smart investor, a student investor, and then someone like me who has to be accountable for the deals that I bring to the investment committee long term, I'm watching them going, do I see them running a 300-person company, in the future? And I know a lot of founders that aren't getting funded, and they think it's never the reason that they think, but what it is the investor just doesn't have confidence that this founder can sell, has the executive presence, has this the package, the it factor, right, that founders need to have, because it's incredibly hard. So in the same vein, if you need to cold call investors, or, I say, well, I'll ask a founder, what about a friends, family, and associates round? Like, go to your friends and network and, see if they'll refer people. And they'll say, no, I won't do it. No, then immediately I'll think to myself, well, then there's no way that you're going to cold call an investor. So I personally think that what you do is you start with introductions. As much as we teach founders to cold call, and I have seen rare instances where that's worked. They've just met someone on Twitter and different things like that. It's very rare. I personally have never cold called an investor. I've raised 9 figures worth of funding. I've never cold called an investor. If you do things right in the beginning, believe me, investors will cold call you. And that's where you want to be. You want to change the dynamic and be in a position of strength to have investors contact you. I know a founder, he was profitable in month 3 and now has 40 million users. And he's getting a VC calling him every single week. He's never going to have to cold call ever again for the rest of his life. So, therefore, it's the same thing. If you need to, employ these tactics where your people are doing it for you, I'm going to question the potential of that founder. And I just always recommend network your way, get a referral. That is by far the best way. And investors will tell you right away, there's 3 ways that they try and find you. They go out and look, and they see a unicorn or someone get buzz in a trade publication, different things like that. They'll go find it. They'll look you up in an investor database. If you've already raised, you're in Crunchbase, you already raised, a seed round, they're going to be tracking on you. But the other way they prefer are referrals. So investors want to do it that way. Then why do founders think that cold calling is the way to reach investors? It's just because they don't have any other perspective or alternative, which I really hope that they would get educated on.
Awesome. Well, and to everyone who's listening to us, go to Ed's channel. He's done already a great video about venture capital. Honestly, I was watching it, and like you said, there might be some thoughts that may not be super popular. But I think this is something every founder should understand. And there are a lot of wrong expectations, a lot of, dreamy expectations about it. It's been romanticized, like you said, in movies and everything, when you just slide the napkin over the bar, with the number that you'd love to get, and they just give it to you. But what do you think is the situation right now? So you said, the current market situation is not very favorable toward the founders. So what to expect, in the Q4 of 2022, and is something going to change, and how in 2023?
To be completely blunt, it's a horrible market right now. It is definitely, an investor's market. Investors are getting the valuations that they want. Capital is always going to be there. I see lots of dry powder sitting around. But the problem is when you go through these different cycles, and this is just the economics, the contextual economics of startups, when professional capital is injected and you need returns, things turn into a bubble. We've gone through the everything bubble type thing. And once that bubble pops, everybody retracts and they spend time, because the markets are emotional. At the end of the day, everything is emotional. So you start to see Facebook lay off 11,000 people, and, you're seeing what's happening with Twitter and what have you. Capital is going to contract and nobody's going to want to invest. Well, then we're going to ask, well, what do you need to see to start investing again? And the answer is we don't know, because what's going to create the next cycle is going to be something new. After Web 1.0, the first .com bubble burst, where I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars and had millions of stock options that were worthless. People didn't know what the next thing was, what Web 2.0 was. So if you look at what happened with crypto, I don't think anybody is going to be raising any funds related to crypto anytime soon. And therefore I say, just stop. Don't think about raising investment. Think about making relationships with potential investors and networks, but just build and fortify and get to the place where you don't need to necessarily raise investment if you don't have to. Obviously, there's some startups that are eventually going to need funding, or they've got ideas, but those are going to be extremely difficult. And unless you have this magical touch and you're an amazing salesperson and you're network with the right people, which I always, like you said in that video, I say you're 6 degrees of separation away from the perfect investor for you. Then if you work on that, then maybe you'll find somebody for sure. But in the meantime, founders have to be thinking about taking a completely different mindset other than I'm building this to raise money. That is just going to be gone. Like, it needs to be stamped out of existence, and we need to pound it out of founders' heads. They can't be thinking that way right now.
Right. No, completely agree with you. I think having raised raising funds a success point is quite wrong, because this is just the beginning.
Yes.
Right. This is just a rapid growth stage that they are entering, and the real work is just beginning. Yeah. And what are the trends that you see right now? Because you have an amazing network of startups coming to you. So what are the trends now? What everyone wants to still be in and build? And is it say, I don't know, Nordics, it's sustainability, right? And maybe the US, it was more for crypto. So what is it that you see?
Yeah, to me, they're all like so there's a difference between trends that people think they should be in and trends that you should be in type thing, right? And so again, I unfortunately, I don't mind saying this, but if I have to look at another NFT project, then I'm going to lose my mind, right? And it's like that's just phase, that cycle is, maybe you can eke out a small living, but Peter Thiel, he writes in his book 0 to 1, he says, the next Mark Zuckerberg is not going to build Facebook type thing. Like, you're just not going to see it. So there's trends that as soon as it becomes a trend, then that's not where you should be looking. So for example, sustainability, yay, let's do sustainability. All founders point to that because they hear, oh, there's money in sustainability and what have you. And professional capital does that on purpose because they want access, deal flow to, the best founders right there. They want to find that diamond in the rough. But then you should be thinking, like what Elon Musk says, if you take analogy-based thinking, which is you hear a story and you say, well, therefore I want that to be my story. So this sustainability founder is being funded. Well, they've been building that for 5 years and they're funded. You're not going to enter into that market and have the same story. So you should be taking a first principles based approach and saying, okay, where's the future going to be? And so one of the things that I think we're looking at is you look at the major pain points that people don't have a solution for some major problems. So I'm interested in things that address government, politics, problems in those arenas, advocacy, the future of work, the problem of quiet quitting, is your remote work created, and all these startups that are, Zoom and everything to do with remote work exploded. But then now we've got another problem that the industry is talking about. Well, it's what is the solution for that in terms of the future of work? Financial, we're watching this, economic disparity happen between the haves and the have-nots, and what are going to be the financial solutions? So fintech is always going to be trendy because people always need money, but what's the contrarian trend compared to where everybody else wants to go? So, blockchain, Web3, DeFi, done. Put a fork in it. If you're smart, you want to become allergic to that, that type of industry and that type of talk. Go look to solve problems that are contrary to the popular trends out there. That's the way founders should be thinking.
Awesome. Well, thank you for saying that, because I think it's super important. And like you said, so many NFT projects, and we've been doing a few too, which is super exciting. They were quite early in the circle, but yeah, completely agree with you. So what would it take to for you to become an advisor for a startup? What are you looking for in a startup or in a founder? Say, we're investing not in the idea, but in a person.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always think my answer is going to be popular, but I want to tell people sort of like, again, expectations versus reality. I brag on my failures for a reason, because that's kind of your barrier to entry as far as an advisor is concerned, is failure, how you've handled failure. But at the same time, you have to have a certain amount of success, and you have to process your failure in a specific way. So there are two types of advisors. One is the advisor that has not been successful at all and has not been successful enough to fail astronomically enough. Like, we're talking complete, utter, total catastrophic failure, because that's the nature of startups. The asymmetric upside is high, but the failure rate, and just, again, look at crypto, look at just what's happening. You can go from billions to complete bankruptcy in a heartbeat, right? And therefore, I see a lot of advisors say, oh, I was super successful in, real estate, and I owned a few companies, and, all this stuff. And they have this adage where they say, if you can't do, teach, right? So a lot of people, they get passionate about something, and they say they can't achieve a certain success. So they start to say, I'll coach you, or I'll be an advisor, or I'm a subject matter expert. And I'll just be very direct. They make the worst advisors, startup advisors ever. So then there's the other type of advisor that doesn't want to be an advisor. Like, I'm too busy, I've got, other things to do, etc. They're the ones that should be the advisor, but, not necessarily full time and what have you. I find the best advisors are not professional advisors. They don't go out and there say, I'm an advisor. I have to take the title of lead advisor for startups.com because it's just good for marketing, but I am by no means a professional advisor. My job is not to advise. My job is to be a founder. And so you have to pick. So you're either an adaptive advisor or a technical advisor. So you have to kind of niche yourself. So either you're going to be a technical advisor, such as like, you are a fractional CTO, and now you can advise companies on the technical side and be part of the advisory board. Or you're like me, whereas I'm more of a generalist. I deal with all the adaptive problems, that happen. So first is you need to think to yourself, well, don't be an advisor if you fall in that category where I couldn't achieve success and have enough success to process failure. And then to become a legitimate advisor, stay in the game. At the same time, pick, am I going to be technical or adaptive as far as my advisory is concerned? That's my perspective on it. My perspective alone, I just want to caveat that because other people may disagree, but I'm pretty black and white when it comes to these things.
Okay. All right. And well, what would be your best advice to the first time early stage founder?
First time early stage founder is get into a community that gives you joy. So, join a joy-based network. And how I mean is, I define joy as the motivation to be with someone or a group of people in strength, but especially weakness, because the emotional capacity required to be a founder is always underestimated. Everybody always overestimates. I do this all the time, overestimates their emotional capacity to handle things being a founder. So when you go into a network, it's kind of, let me use this analogy. You speak, Anna, you speak multiple languages, right? How many languages do you speak?
Let's say 3.
3 languages. Okay. And while you're learning those languages, they said that the best thing to do is have someone who teaches you, but someone you can practice with that doesn't correct you, that you can make mistakes with, and they're willing to hold that space and to practice with you. So I'm going to assume that you had those types of people who give me an example of that type of person.
Well, I don't know. I had a Spanish teacher, but then I also, when I moved to South America, I also had a roommate. So he never really questioned my Spanish.
Yeah, you were able to practice, even though you were not as proficient in Spanish.
Yeah.
You were able to practice. It's the same thing with founders. So get into a network where, like investors are going to judge you because they have to, and your self-esteem is just going to get beaten up. Get into a network where you can make mistakes, you can say all the dumb things, you can make all the assumptions and go, oh, I can't believe, I should know this. And they go, that's okay. People around you, that's okay. We were there, right there with you. And then get around those people. Those are the same people that when something really great happens, you hit a milestone, those are the people you want to tell. Guess what? I got my first paying customer. I was like, hooray, type thing. If you can create that base of relationships, that community in your life, and you don't need a lot. And it could be your spouse, could be, obviously co-founders could be in the mix of that. Then you will have the emotional capacity, the foundation, and all the, psychological construct to build any type of startup that you want, because you'll have a growth mindset. You'll go out and you'll learn, you'll get educated, you'll be coachable, you'll feel secure, all those things. And you'll just be someone that people want to refer business to, introduce to their investors and what have you. That's my number one advice, which is what I really like about, and shout out to Mars for doing the same thing. I hear stories about how you're building community and how you talk to the founders, and, the accessibility to your founder, John, and things like that. I think that's very important first step for any first time founder.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for the shout out. I mean, obviously a lot of concerns on our side as well. We're building quite a big thing. So thanks for the validation. And thanks for being here, Ed. I mean, it was amazing. And thanks for being honest. Thanks for making sure that it's not all dreamy and romantic, but it's honest and brutal sometimes.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
We shall. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. Well, take care.